Welcome back to ETF.com Live, the video edition. My name is Dave Nottig, Managing Director here at ETF.com. Great question from today's live chat. The questioner, Todd Rosenbluth from CFRA, was asking whether or not it was common to see the kinds of things we saw last week where you have a couple of ETFs actually raising their expense ratios. We've been so in-depth into this fee war where we actually now have some zero-cost ETFs that I think we lose sight of the fact that ETF expense ratios often go up and down. So why would that be? Why are ETF expense ratios not just fixed? Well, different firms and different individual funds by prospectus treat their expenses a little bit differently. On one end of the spectrum, we have firms that basically give you a single all-in cost. So for instance, it might say in the prospectus that the expenses will be capped at 50 basis points. And what that means is you don't have to worry about whether or not the cost of the legal team last year was more or less than they expected, or whether the audit took longer, or even whether or not the fund manager wanted to get paid more or less money. Doesn't matter because they're saying the expenses will never be more than X. And that number tends to be a cap that they feel comfortable managing underneath. So in other words, they're going to keep the remainder as the investment manager of anything they don't have to spend money on. That's very common, and that's why you see some ETFs just sort of flatline and never change. And when they do change, it's a refiling of the prospectus, and it's based on their belief on the economies of scale built into the portfolio. Other firms, Vanguard most notably, really look at each individual fund's actual expenses and are constantly tweaking their estimation on what you're going to pay next year. That basically means that they're running this fund at cost. There's some small investment management fee which goes to Vanguard as a company, but most of the expenses are actually real expenses, things that cost to run the fund. And so you expect to see that go up and down a little bit as expenses go up and down. And over time, as they get more assets, you'd expect your expense ratio to come down because a lot of the costs, say a portfolio manager, are fixed costs. But it's important to note that that can go up. It doesn't just go one way. If you have a fund that doesn't particularly gain a lot of assets, or maybe has some assets come out, that could mean that your real expenses are actually going to go up as a share of the fund. So you do need to be paying attention. You need to look at those things, but don't assume that ETF fees can only ever go one direction. If you're concerned about this, the thing to do, unfortunately, is actually read the prospectus. In the prospectus, it's going to tell you what their estimates of actual expenses are, what any caps might be, when those caps expire. Some of the cheapest funds that we've got out there, for instance, these new zero-cost funds from SoFi, they're not really zero cost. They're capping the expenses at zero. There are costs to that fund. You're just not paying them. They're being eaten by the management company, effectively as a marketing expense. But that doesn't last forever. Those caps come off in a year or so, and then there'll be a normal expense ratio associated with that fund unless they re-up that cap, which they'll probably do. So again, no way to know all this stuff unless you dig deep into the prospectus because there's more to expense ratio than just that single number you see on the sheet.